Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and a very good day to you. We from Group 1, Section 3 will be presenting our final research project which is entitled A Contrastive Analysis of Grammatical and Lexical Features in Tech Talks by Susan Cain and Mariana Atencio. Okay, here I will be introducing our group members for today's presentation, which the first one is Masita binti Azmi. The second one is Wanur Elna binti Wan Muhammad Noor. The third one is Nur Hazika Izzati binti Muhammad Azhar. And lastly includes myself, Muhammad Oman bin Nur Hisham. So to begin with our presentation of our research project, let's begin with the abstract. Alright, our study compares the grammar and the vocabulary used by a native English speaker named Susan Cain, also with another speaker which is a non-native English speaker named Mariana Atencio, in both of their TED Talks. We analyze the differences and the key similarities, and we also predict the possible errors that non-native speakers may produce. Their findings help us to understand better the influence of the first language of the L1 in spoken English. Alright, so moving on to the next part of in our presentation is the introduction. So I'll be explaining more about it. Okay, so as we all know, in this era of globalization, where English is widely used as a global language, but still many non-native English speakers still struggling with the grammar and the vocabulary. In spoken English, especially in public presentations like TED Talks, where speakers have to speak out in front of large crowds, it shows real examples of how the speakers use the English language. And by comparing in our study, by comparing a native and also a non-native speaker, we can observe the language patterns, the cross-linguistic influence, and also the possible areas where errors may occur. Okay, so for this part, the background of the study. Alright, our study is based on two important theories. The first one is Robert Lado's contrastive analysis theory, proposed in 1957, which states that non-native speakers often transfer structures from their first language, the L1, into the English language. This can cause predictable errors. Second one, proposed by Prator in 1971, he emphasizes that analyzing learner error systematically helps teachers identify common problems. And in our research, we analyze the TED Talks by Susan Cain, a native speaker, and also Mariana Atencio, a non-native speaker. She is a Spanish, to identify the grammatical and lexical similarities and the differences. For this part is the statement of the problem, and I'll be explaining more about it. Okay, despite having access to various learning resources, we had identified a problem that non-native English speakers continue to make recurring grammatical and vocabulary errors. Such errors can negatively affect their communication, their confidence, and the overall academic performance. And this study assumes that a systematic comparison between a native and non-native spoken English can highlight any predictable error patterns that had been influenced by the first language, or the L1. Therefore, this research aims to address this gap by providing a detailed analysis of cross-linguistic influence through the examination of grammatical and lexical features in the selected TED Talks. Alright, so moving on to the next part, which comprises of the research objective and the research questions. Alright, the first one, the research objectives. Our research project is grounded on two main objectives. The first one is to identify the similarities and the differences in grammar and the vocabulary sets between a native and non-native English speaker. The second one of our objective is to predict the grammatical and vocabulary errors a non-native speakers may produce based on the cross-linguistic differences. And the next one is the research questions for the second part. To guide our study, we develop two kinds of research questions. The first one, what are the similarities and the differences in grammar and vocabulary between a native and non-native speaker? So that would be our first research questions. We're highlighting on the similarities and the key differences in the grammatical structures and the vocabulary sets. The second one is what grammatical and vocabulary errors can be predicted based on these differences. The second research questions, we're mainly focusing on the errors from the grammatical and vocabulary sets that have been predicted, that have been observed by the differences of these two speakers. So, for the significance of our study, alright, why are we focusing on the matter of this matter in our research project? Is because this study is very meaningful because it provides the insight into the challenges that have been faced by the non-native English speakers as in the context of the Malaysian learners. So the first one, for the teachers, it helps to identify common error areas, and this would help them in developing good lesson plans for the students later on in the classrooms. The second one, for the students, it increases the awareness of the mistakes they might make. As we all know, non-native speakers like the Malaysian students, they are usually committing mistakes during doing the English lessons. And for the next part is for the researchers. It strengthens the understanding of the language transfer and the contrastive analysis in the spoken English language. Okay, so to conclude our chapter 1 of our presentation, we had outlined the overview of the background of the problem statement, of the research objectives, and the research questions. And this had set the foundation by explaining why comparing native and non-native speaker is important. And it leads into the theoretical concepts that we'll be discussing on in chapter 2 that would support our study. Alright, so moving on to our chapter 2, which is our literature review. So in chapter 2, we review the theories and the studies that is relevant to our research. We focus on contrastive analysis, the language transfer, and how grammar and vocabulary differ in native and non-native speech. Okay, so moving on to the next part is I'll be explaining more on the theoretical background of contrastive analysis, or the CA, in our literature review. Contrastive analysis is a method of comparing two languages in which usually the learners of the first language, the L1, and the target language, and we keen to identify the key similarities and the differences. In CA, we assume that similarities make learning easier, while differences can cause errors. And this theory helps explain why certain English structures are difficult for non-native speakers. Alright, so for the next part, I'll be explaining more about the CA theory, which had been proposed by Robert Lado in 1957. Okay, according to Robert Lado, learners often transfer the patterns from their first language, which is the L1, into the English language. So, when these two languages differ, errors are likely to occur. And hence, in our study, we apply the CA theory by comparing the grammar and the vocabulary used by the two TED Talk speakers, which is Susan Cain and Mariana Atencio, in order to identify these patterns. Okay, so for this part, I'll be talking about the importance of this contrastive analysis or the CA theory. Why is the CA theory is very important? Alright, first of all, it helps to predict the learner's errors and explains the influence of the first language or the L1 into the target language. Second one, it helps teachers to design targeted language support and also in planning further lessons for the students in the classroom. The third one, it helps the researcher to understand the language transfer by analyzing the native versus the non-native speaker differences.
Chapter 3 explains the methodology of our study. We use a qualitative design to compare the grammatical and lexical features of a native and a non-native TED Talk speaker. The data came from YouTube and were manually transcribed. The analysis followed Ladou's theory and Pareto's level of difficulty using 4 steps, which is selection, descriptions, comparisons, and prediction. This study also refers to Jumanto's 2019 contrastive analysis of English and Indonesian idiom as a supporting reference for understanding how linguistic differences can be systematically compared. In this research, we used a qualitative design. This allows us to examine language in real context and look at patterns from both speakers. This design supports contrastive analysis and helps predict possible errors using Ladou's and Pareto's framework. The population of this study is TED Talk speakers who use English. From this population, we selected 2 speakers, Susan Cain as the native speaker and Mariana Atencio as the non-native speaker. We used 2 videos from each speaker and created manual transcript for accurate analysis. The main instrument in this study is the manual transcript of the 4 TED Talks. We cross-checked the transcript with YouTube auto-generated text. We then coded the data into grammar features and vocabulary features. The data collection followed 6 steps. First, we selected the native and the non-native speakers. Second, we chose 2 TED Talks videos from each speaker. Third, we extracted the transcript using an AI tool. Fourth, we corrected the transcripts manually. Fifth, we selected sentences that contain grammar or vocabulary features. Finally, we categorized the data into grammar and vocabulary groups. For the data analysis, we use 4 procedures. First is selections, where we choose relevant sentences. Second is descriptions, where we analyze the grammar and vocabulary in each sentence. Third is comparison, where we place the sentences side by side to find similarities and differences. Fourth is predictions, where we use Ladou's theory and Pareto's levels to predict possible errors for the non-native speakers. This study followed ethical guidelines. All data were taken from public TED Talks, so no personal information was involved, so the speeches were not misrepresented and all sources were properly acknowledged. In conclusion, this chapter explains every step of the methodology, from choosing the speakers and videos to analyzing the data. The study used selection, descriptions, comparison, and prediction to examine grammar and vocabulary. These methods ensure that the analysis is clear, reliable, and aligned with the research objective. That's all from me. I will pass to the next presenter.
Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Nurhazika Izzati binti Muhammad Sahar. Today, I'll be presenting the theoretical framework of our study, which compares the language use of native speaker Susan Cain and non-native speaker Mariana Atencio in their TED Talks. Our analysis is built on 2 key theories, Pareto's hierarchy of difficulty and Ladou's contrastive analysis. So let's begin with Clifford Pareto's work from 1967. Pareto provided one of the earliest foundations in contrastive linguistics. His central argument was that the difficulties faced by second language learners are not random. Instead, they follow a predictable hierarchy of difficulty, which is shaped by how similar or different the features of the target language are from the learner's first language. So, when structures are the same between the first language or L1 and the second language L2, learning is easier. But when the structures are functionally different, learners face greater challenges. This theory remains highly relevant, which is why we use it in our study to understand how Mariana Atencio's first language, which is Spanish, might influence her language grammar and vocabulary. Pratta's model suggests that learner difficulty is systematically related to the differences between their L1 and L2. Similar features are easy to use, while different structures increase the errors, a process known as transfer. To break this down, Pratta established 6 categories arranged in ascending order of difficulty. The first one, level 0, transfer, is the easiest level. Here, features are identical in both languages, so the learner can directly transfer them. And then level 1, coalescence, is when 2 items in the L1 become 1 item in the L2. Next, level 2 occurs when the L1 lacks a feature that exists in the L2. Level 3, reinterpretation, is when an L1 feature must be used differently in the L2. Level 4 introduces a brand new feature that doesn't exist in the L1. And finally, level 5, split, is the most difficult level. Here, 1 item in the L2 splits into 2 or more distinct features in the L2. So this hierarchy helps us pinpoint exactly why a specific structure might be challenging for a non-native speaker like Mariana Atencio. Now, let's look at the second key theory, Ladder's contrastive analysis. This framework aligns closely with Pratta's. Ladder argued that the grammatical structures of learners' first language heavily influence their second language performance. When grammatical features are similar, learners can use them correctly. However, when structures are different, the probability of error is much higher because learners easily transfer the rules from their native language. In our study, when we compare Susan Cain and Mariana Atencio in terms of grammatical structures, Ladder's theories help us predict that Mariana might apply Spanish grammatical rules to English language, leading to predictable error patterns, a point supported by recent studies. Ladder's theory also applies to lexical features, which is vocabulary. Learners find it easier when vocabulary systems between languages connect, but they face difficulties when the lexical features don't match. We expect Susan Cain to use vocabulary naturally, while Mariana Atencio's choices or vocabulary choices might be influenced by Spanish. This could manifest as direct translations from Spanish vocabulary to English. Recent research confirms that this kind of lexical transfer is a predictable trend, and we use Ladder's approach to analyze it in our data. In conclusion, this framework supports our objective by allowing us to compare the grammatical and lexical choices of 2 different speakers and explain and predict the causes of errors made by the non-native speaker. They clarify why Susan Cain can speak fluently with accurate structures, while Mariana Atencio may struggle due to cross-linguistic differences. By using these theories, our study can systematically investigate the similarities, differences, and anticipated challenges in their language use.
Hi, my name is Wanur Elena. So I will be explaining on chapter 4, which includes the findings and discussion on our research. So firstly, in this table shows the grammatical features that we found in the transcription, which are included the 3 of item subject pronouns, 4 item of possessive pronouns, and 3 item of indefinite articles, which resulted the total of 10 items for grammatical features. So the second one is lexical features. So we found that 4 items of lexical transfers, 3 items of false friends, and 3 items of orthographic, which the total is similar to the grammar features, which are 10 items in total. Alright, so now let's look at the discussion of our findings. So we use 4 steps of contrastive analysis to analyze our finding as mentioned by Masita earlier. So in this presentation, I will show you one of an example in our findings, which is for grammatical features, as you can see in the table. So what we will do with our finding is, first, we use the step 1, which is selection. So we choose the sentences with clear grammar or lexical features. So in this table, I choose the grammatical features of possessive pronouns. So that is my selection. So as you can see in the table, are actually the utterances that I gain from our data. So why we choose these utterances? Because you can see the underlined words is actually represent the possessive pronouns that L1 and L2 use in their speech. So now we have found our selection. We have done the first step, which is selection. Now is step 2, which is description. So in this step, we break down the grammar features in each sentences. So for example, here we have 2 sentences from Susan King and 2 sentences from Mariana. You can see now the word like their and his represent, that I underline is actually represent the possessive pronouns in English. But we want to see the similarities and differences between both of these speakers. Either they use the correct possessive pronouns or not. So to examine the similarities and differences, we will go for the next step, which is step 3. So to examine the similarities and differences, we go for the next step, which is step 3, where we compare both native and non-native use of possessive pronouns side by side. So here in the table above, when we read the sentence from the native speaker, he dreamed up many of his amazing creation. So the native speaker used the correct possessive pronouns, his, when referring to a boy, which is he, at her first sentences. While if we look at the sentences by non-native, Nicolas Maduro blaming their regime, non-native speaker used the wrong possessive pronouns of their. So this is because Nicolas Maduro's is actually singular. So instead of replace their to his, non-native speaker tend to use the wrong possessive pronouns, which ungrammatically correct in English. So another item is in the table below. We can see in native speaker, she used the correct possessive pronoun again in her sentences, like much better for everybody to go off themselves, generate their own idea. So she used possessive pronoun their to refer to themselves. But again, for non-native, her sentences is don't look at them. We did not speak his language. So she used his to refer to them instead of use their. Okay. So however, when we compare all native and non-native speaker sentences, they are actually share the same meaning, which is they want to express the ownerships. And the similarities that we found in these sentences is both native and non-native speaker have the possessive pronouns in their language, but the differences is in Spanish, in English, possessive pronoun included like his, her, or their. But in Spanish, there is only form sus and sus. So according to the Whitney 2002, in Spanish, English grammar comparison, this single Spanish form often leads to confusion when selecting English possessive. So, because of this, Spanish often confuse which possessive pronouns to use correctly in English. So these differences clearly shows cross-linguistic interference. And this also supported by Audley 1989, who mentioned that cross-linguistic features is most visible when L1 category lacks distinction required in the L2. Alright, so after we found the similarities and differences, we can now do the prediction. So we are referring to Pareto's hierarchy of difficulties. So according to the Pareto, these situations falls under level 5, which is split. This is because one Spanish form, like Sue, must be split into 3 English forms. So learners must create the distinction that do not exist in their L1. So these are all of the 4 steps we use for our analysis. So same goes to the vocabulary features. We use this step to analyze the vocabulary features between the non-native and native speakers. So I think that is all for me, for my part, which is finding and discussion. Thank you so much.
This chapter serves as the conclusion of our study. I will summarize the key implications of our findings, provide recommendations for learners, educators, and future researchers. Okay, first, our analysis reveals 3 main applications. Okay, firstly, for teaching, the comparison between Susan Cain and Mariana Atencio clearly shows that language background shapes grammar and vocabulary use. And the practical takeaway is that teachers should design materials that target the specific features most challenging for their learners based on their first language. Okay, secondly, for learning, Mariana's errors, influenced by her native Spanish, are perfectly explained by Pareto's hierarchy of difficulty. This shows that learners must understand the root causes of their errors to improve effectively. And the last one is for proficiency. We confirm that native speakers use language more flexibly and naturally, while non-native speakers often use simpler structures. And this implies that true spoken proficiency comes from a deep comprehension of English rules, and our insights can help learners improve their accuracy, fluency, and clarity. Recommendations. Based on these findings, we have the following recommendations. Okay, the first one, for learners, actively analyze speeches by both native speaker and non-native speakers. Pay attention to how a native speaker like Susan Cain use natural patterns, and notice where non-native speakers make errors. So this will sharpen the skills. Okay, second, for educators, use this study to curate classroom activities. Okay, for example, use TED Talks or forum discussion to highlight sentences that are frequently misused due to first language interference. Use real-world materials to expose learners to real language use. For future researchers, we encourage others to build on this work. Future studies can expose different pairs of speakers, investigate the other language features, or examine a wider variety of first language backgrounds. In summary, this study has successfully achieved its objective. We identified the similarities and differences in language use between a native and a non-native speaker. We systematically predicted and explained errors based on cross-linguistic differences. So the theory of Lado and Pareto were essential in guiding this analysis and proving the influence of a first language on English use. So this study enhanced our understanding of real-world English in public speaking. So we believe that the implications and recommendations provided here offer the benefit for anyone looking to improve, teach, or research spoken English. So that's all from me. Thank you.